Hi, in this video, we are going to talk about adverbs of frequency, how to use them, what the exceptions are, and the most common adverbs of frequency. So let's take a look. Adverbs of frequency. We use adverbs of frequency in the present simple tense. We don't use adverbs of frequency in any continuous or these adverbs of frequency in continuous tenses. So if you're using an adverb of frequency, it goes with the simple tense because the present simple tense is for habitual actions. So if it's habitual, it means you do it many times. It is a repeated action. It is used for the state of being verbs, which can't go into a continuous tense, and it's used for feelings. Okay? The adverbs of frequency are always, often, frequently, usually, sometimes, occasionally, seldom, hardly ever, and never. We write it like this. She's always hungry. He never sleeps. All right, we'll get into these two forms because here you might say, why is it before the verb? And here it's after the verb, which is. Before we get there, let's take a look at the frequency of these things. Okay, always is 100% of the time. Often is about 90% of the time. Notice that I pronounce it often. I don't pronounce the T in often. It is a most accepted, the most accepted form of pronunciation in North American English is to pronounce it often with no T. However, many native speakers say it with a T, and it is an acceptable way to say it. So often or often. Often is how I pronounce it. Frequently is also 90% of the time. Usually will be 80% of the time. Sometimes, let's change in the color here because this is really hard to see. There we go. Usually is 80% of the time. Sometimes is 50% of the time. Occasionally, 30% of the time. Seldom is 20% of the time. Hardly ever is 10% of the time. And never is 0% of the time. Okay? He never sleeps. Means 0% of the time he sleeps. That's the literal translation. However, we know that, or the literal meaning of he never sleeps is 0% of the time. We could say it in the opposite. He is always awake. But you know that that's impossible. So if I say he never sleeps, I mean that he usually doesn't sleep or he seldom sleeps. So we have to listen to what it's about. If I have insomnia and I say, oh, call me anytime, I never sleep because I have insomnia, that means that I might be asleep occasionally. It's impossible for someone to never sleep. Let's talk about why is she is always hungry, always goes after the is, but he never sleeps. Okay? Is a weird verb. The be verb in any language is going to be irregular. Because this is my thought process on this, the be verb comes before language really formed. It is the first verb that a person is going to need in order to express themselves. The first thing I ever want to say is, I am Zadie, the be verb. And some languages don't even use a be verb in the present tense. Others have two be verbs, and depending on if it's a momentary identity or if it's a long-lasting identity. So the be verb is weird, and it conjugates weird in most languages too. So anytime you see the be verb, understand you're dealing with an exception to the rule. And the adverb goes after the be verb. That's for the be verb. But for all other verbs, the adverb goes before the verb. He never sleeps. So that's just a rule of thumb. The be verb is going to be weird, and your adverbs go after. But for all other verbs, it goes before. Now, there are two other places that you can put some of these adverbs of time, or these adverbs of frequency, okay? So where can we put these? Let's try it out. So if I have always, and we're going to just use he sleeps as our base, as our base sentence here. Okay, so we're looking at he sleeps. Where do we put the verb always? We can put it in two places. Each adverb is a little bit different. So we can say he always sleeps. We can say he sleeps always. Okay, and I didn't put it directly after. He sleeps in his bed always. He always sleeps. Let's put this in his bed in all of the sentences, because it's going to help you. Okay, so it's going to help you see the difference. So we say he always sleeps in his bed. He sleeps in his bed always. That's where you can put these. Okay, let's try it with often. It goes in the middle, before the verb, or at the end, just like always. You can't put these at the beginning. You can't say often he sleeps in his bed. However, with frequently, you can. Okay. And we have one more option with frequently. And it is at the beginning. Frequently, he sleeps in his bed. He frequently sleeps in his bed. Or you can say, he sleeps in his bed frequently. Okay? Usually does not have this first placement. You can say he usually sleeps in his bed. And you really don't use it in the last one. So usually, he usually sleeps in his bed. That's really the only placement for usually. But sometimes has all three placements. There's no rhyme or reason to whether or not it has it has many places you can put it, or just one place you can put it. It just depends on, the adverb itself. Okay? So he usually sleeps in his bed. Let me try and move this for you. There we go. Okay? He sometimes sleeps in his bed. You can say sometimes he sleeps in his bed. Notice this is a mistake I see in a lot of students writing. They don't put a space between the punctuation and the next letter. So when you're writing in English, make sure you leave a space here. Sometimes he sleeps in his bed. He sometimes sleeps in his bed. He sleeps in his bed sometimes. Okay? You can use it in all three places with sometimes. Occasionally he sleeps in his bed. He occasionally sleeps in his bed. He sleeps in his bed occasionally. So occasionally also works that way. Occasionally also works this way. Notice the commas when it's not in the middle. Okay? Seldom. Seldom does not work at the beginning. You can't say seldom he sleeps in his bed. Seldom works here. It doesn't work here. Okay? You will always be safest if you put the adverb of frequency right before the verb, because that's the one that will always work. Hardly ever. He hardly ever sleeps in his bed. That's the only placement for hardly ever. And it's the only placement for never. Okay? He never sleeps in his bed. Now, let's take a look at how these different adverbs work with questions and negatives. Okay? We'll talk first about, I don't like Sarah is a nurse as this. He Okay, we're going to use the same. He is our subject. Sleeps is our verb. We only have one verb. We only have one verb because it is the present simple tense, and this is a statement. When I make it negative, I need the auxiliary verb. Now, because I'm not working with the be verb, I'm working with this one verb, and it's one of all the other verbs besides the be verb. My auxiliary verb must be do. So we can just take those away. Okay, do is our auxiliary verb. If I want to make this, first I'll use never. No, I won't. I'll use usually. He usually sleeps in his bed. Now, if I want to make it a negative statement, I'll put the do in here. But with he, the conjugation of do is does. So I'm going to put he does, and then I put the not. Okay, he does not usually, and now because I have the S here, I can get rid of the S here. He does not usually sleep in his bed. And then you're going to hear doesn't more often than you will hear does not. He doesn't usually sleep in his bed. Okay? If I am making this negative statement with seldom, seldom is already a negative. So I wouldn't use the does at all. I would just say he seldom sleeps in his bed. And if I'm using hardly ever and never, it works the same way. Okay? Hardly ever, never. That's because they are already negative. So I don't need the not in there. So I can just, for he hardly ever sleeps in his bed. Hardly ever does he ever sleep in his bed. He hardly ever sleeps in his bed because we don't have the does. So now we need the S on the end of sleeps to match with he. Okay. I can also, he seldom. Already a negative, so I don't need to put a not in there. Okay. So those are our negative statements. If I make it a question, and remember we didn't want to work with, let's just use this. I didn't want to work with Sarah is a nurse. I want to keep this sentence that we're working with. And this time we're going to make it a question. Okay. First, let's make a, let's use the usually again. He usually sleeps in his bed. Now, to make a question, we still need our auxiliary verb. So the auxiliary verb is does, and we start with that. Does he usually, and then because the S is here, we don't need it here. Does he usually sleep in his bed? And the answer would be yes, he does, or no, he doesn't. Remember, we always answer with the auxiliary verb. Whatever the auxiliary verb is, that's the verb we use to answer. So the answer would be yes, he does, or no, he doesn't. Okay? Those are the short answers. We don't need to say, yes, he sleeps. We say, yes, he does. Okay? That's how we ask the question. Now, how do we ask the question with the different adverbs? Does he usually sleep in his bed? Does he always sleep in his bed? You can say, does he sleep in his bed always? But you can't say, and you can say, does he sleep in his bed often? Does he sleep in his bed frequently? And does he frequently sleep in his bed? So it works the same placement that worked for the statement, these different placements. The same placement that worked for the statements works here, except you can't put it at the beginning. So does he sometimes sleep in his bed? Does he sleep in his bed sometimes? That works. Does he occasionally sleep in his bed? Does he sleep in his bed occasionally? Does he seldom sleep in his bed? Does he sleep in his bed seldom? No. Can't put seldom at the end. Does he hardly ever sleep in his bed? No. I would ask how often does he sleep in his bed? I wouldn't say does he hardly ever. but I might ask, does he never sleep in his bed? And that one, I am a bit incredulous. I can't believe if I say, does he never sleep in his bed? I can't believe that he never sleeps in his bed. So there's that feeling to it. What's up with him? Does he never sleep in his bed? Okay, so that's how you use and where you place adverbs of frequency. I want you to try it. I want you to try with a lot of different things, with a lot of different sentences, and put them in the comments below. If you get it in the wrong place, I will correct it. You can just say, correction needed. Where does this adverb go? And I will happily correct what's in the comments. So stay tuned for my next video, and I will talk to you later. Bye-bye.